Hi, my name's David Holtz. I'm the Research and Emerging Technologies Librarian here at Santa Clara Law, and this is the screencast on the legislative process and how to compile legislative histories. We're going to begin the screencast with an overview of the federal legislative process. There are a number of steps, as you would expect in the legislative process. The first step is referral to committee. At this point, the committee begins action on the referral, begins investigation of the topic of the proposed legislation. It may refer itself to a subcommittee. At the subcommittee level, hearings may take place, committee reports may be created, members of either the committee or the subcommittee may make a request to the CRS, the Congressional Research Service, to prepare a report to educate members of the committee on the particular subject area being impacted by the proposed legislation. The committee then will mark up the legislation, and if the bill passes out of the committee, which frequently it does not, most bills do die in committee, there will be a report that will be produced by the committee after the bill has passed by a majority vote. And at that point, floor action can begin. This is where debate and the floor vote will take place. If it passes via a floor vote on the legislative chamber, at the legislative chamber, then it is then referred to the other chamber. The federal government, of course, is bicameral, as are all of the state legislatures, with the exception of Nebraska. The process then begins in the other chamber. If there are differences in the bill that has been passed from both chambers, a conference committee will be convened to work out any differences. Final actions will be working out those differences, referring the final bill to both chambers for passage again. If that takes place, it is then delivered to the executive branch. For the federal government, of course, that's the president. For the states, that would be the governor. The executive branch has the option to exercise a veto or to sign the bill into law. The types of bills that are created in Congress will include our House and Senate bills, which are predominantly going to be the types of bills that you will encounter in legal practice. House and Senate bills always are prefaced with a abbreviation for the chamber. It's S for Senate and HR for House of Representatives. The HR is House of Representatives, not House Resolution. That's a common mistake there. There are two types of bills that are created in either the House or the Senate, and those are public or private. Public bills, as the name implies, affect the public generally. Private bills are generally designed to provide immigration relief for a particular person or group, or other claims against the United States, something that only affects an individual or a small group. There are also joint resolutions. In practice, there's very little difference between a joint resolution and a bill. The major difference is simply the form. When a joint resolution is to amend the Constitution, it has to be approved by 2/3 of both chambers, but it's not presented to the President, but rather to the Archivist for submission to the states. There are also concurrent resolutions. These are not legislative, and so they are not presented to the President. They're merely used to express facts or sometimes to designate a month as something or other, or to commemorate an individual, blah, 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 blah. The types of documents that are produced during the legislative process are going to be the materials that you will look at to determine legislative intent. One of the most substantive of these are your committee reports. Committee reports are created by committees in either the House of Representatives or by the Senate. Generally, they are going to be assigned a committee report number, which, much like public laws, will have a 2-number citation. The number that precedes the dash is the legislative session itself, and the number that follows is the sequence in which the report was created. The committee reports will provide results of investigation, anything the committee discovered during hearings that it may have learned via a CRS report or via other investigative activities. federal government also has something called committee prints, and the distinction between a print and a report is rather minor. The real distinction is that committee reports are designed for public consumption, however, prints are not. Because of that, the numbering system for committee prints is a little less consistent than it is for reports. We also have published hearings. Hearings are going to be available on the committee's website if it is rather recent. We also have these archived electronically in ProQuest Congressional, which I'm going to go into in just a second. The Congressional Research Service is also an invaluable source of legislative intent and the expected result of proposed legislation. The Congressional Research Service is, think of it pretty much as the reference desk for Congress. It does not offer any public services. It works exclusively for members of Congress. It provides analysis to committees and to individuals in both chambers. The CRS is also known for producing legislative histories. If you are doing a legislative history and you find a CRS report that has compiled a legislative history for you that's on point, it's often a wealth of information. Okay, sources of federal legislative documents. These are how the documents we just discussed get compiled, aggregated, and published. And we're starting this overview chronologically. And so we're starting with the American State Papers. The American State Papers is a 38-volume set that contains executive and legislative documents from 1789, so from the beginning of the country, to 1838. It has now been digitized and is available within the American Memory Project of the Library of Congress. For this time period, often the American State Papers are going to be your only source for those materials. The U.S. serial set picks up where the American State Papers collection leaves off, although there is some overlap. It starts in 1817 and goes to present. The big value of the U.S. serial set is the CIS U.S. serial set index, which is now owned by ProQuest, and it is the indexing schema for federal legislative materials. It's the main tool that you would use to locate legislative documents prior to 1970. As we move into the present, we now have electronic access to an array of legislative materials via a website that is operated by the Library of Congress called congress.gov. This used to be called Thomas, and that was deprecated not quite 2 years ago. It will contain congressional reports from 95 onward and legislation, meaning your public laws from 73 to present. Another major source is the GPO itself. It's really the host for much of the documents that are located on congress.gov. The GPO is the government printing office. It also contains executive documents from 93 onward, a current version of the U.S. Code, and U.S. statutes at large from 51 to 2011. Remember, of course, that statutes at large are our source of federal session laws. Okay, let's move into our California legislative process here in California. There's an array of types of bills that can be created in either chamber of the state legislature, much the same as it is for the federal legislature, however. Few differences here, though. The California Office of Legislative Counsel is a major source for legislative materials. Think of it as a group of lawyers who serve the members of our state legislature. They prepare draft legislation, opinions, and legal services to the legislature. Many of the documents that are produced by this office may end up in the legislative record for a particular bill. There's also the California Legislative Analyst Office, and this is the fiscal and policy advisor for the legislature. One of their big projects is to analyze the current code to make recommendations to the legislature for the following legislative session. It also produces reports on the fiscal impact of not only proposed ballot measures but of legislative activity, and it analyzes the governor's annual budget. The Governor's Chaptered Bill file is our source for many of these legislative documents from the years 1943 till 2010. The reason why it stops at 2010 is because the governors themselves have to give permission for their documents to be included in this database, and the state has not yet received permission from Schwarzenegger. However, from 43 to 2010, the Governor's Chapter Bill file is going to be your primary source for materials created by the Legislative Council, by the Attorney General, by state agencies, the Governor's staff. It's also going to include the Governor's veto message or signing statement, and it may have committee reports that have been included. This generally is going to be your first stop in looking at California legislative materials. Unfortunately, it is rather antiquated. It is still on film. And so you need to use a microfiche reader or a digital film scanner to locate materials that are in this collection. If your document is not available in the Governor's Chapter Bill file because it either predates or follows the date coverage, or it simply was not selected for inclusion, then your only recourse is to make a request from the California State Archives. Be forewarned, however, that working with state archives is a rather long, laborious process. It's done entirely in print and via fax machine. They have not yet really entered the 21st century. When you make requests from the State Archives in Sacramento, you have to fax in a request. They fax back what's available. Then you fax in what you want. They photocopy what you want and then mail it back to you. It's rather slow. Okay, I am including a section on executive documents here. Not that you're going to encounter this much in legal practice. However, I thought it would be good just to give you a few minutes overview of executive documents, because it's probably the only time in law school that you'll ever hear anyone talk about them. For presidential documents, orders and proclamations are published in the Federal Register, which, remember, the Federal Register is our work log of regulatory activity by the federal government. It's also our source for executive documents. Executive documents are later codified, so to speak, in Title III of the Code of Federal Regulations from 1935 onward. Documents that precede the codification of federal regulations in the CFR will be located at the University of California, Santa Barbara Presidential Documents Archive. And they have coverage from George Washington to present. So if you need orders, proclamations, other executive documents, UCSB's collection will generally be an excellent source for you. For California, coverage is rather spotty. You may be able to locate executive orders on the governor's website. You may also be able to locate the governor's signing or veto statements in the Governor's Chaptered Bill file. However, frequently you may need to make requests from the State Archive in Sacramento for state executive documents. Okay, let's dive into some of these sources that we just discussed. The first one that I'd like to show you is CalLegInfo. This is a site that was just recently updated. It's much better than the site that we had been using for years. If we click on bill information here, and then select a bill number, let's randomly pick a bill number here. Let's say 25. From the Assembly, the current legislative session. Notice that there is more than 125 because we have different bill numbers. We have House bills, concurrent resolutions, joint resolutions. So we want AB 25. It's going to give me the Legislative Council's Digest, so a synopsis of the proposed legislation. Notice that all proposed legislation in California has to start with this sentence: the people of the state of California do enact as follows. This is actually constitutionally required. You'll notice with a lot of the state statutes, they will refer to the code section that's being created or modified. So there's no issue of positive law here that we encountered with our positive law problem with a federal statute earlier in this semester, if you recall. CalLegInfo is going to give us information about the votes. So because this bill costs money, it had to be referred to both the Committee on Education and to an Appropriations Committee. You'll have the votes from both of those committees in addition to the floor votes. Its major legislative history. And here's the substantive material here is under bill analysis. This is the area where you will locate your committee reports. And so we have our committee report from the Committee on Higher Education. We also have a committee report from the Appropriations Committee. And then we have a report that was written for the floor analysis. So if we click on the report for the Higher Education Committee, you'll notice that this is a PDF. You click on the PDF, and it gives you our substantive analysis of the proposed legislation. This is really where you would look to determine legislative intent. Okay, let's jump into congress.gov. Remember, congress.gov is hosted by the Library of Congress, and this is our source of federal legislative materials for fairly recent legislation. You can locate public laws here all the way back to the 93rd Congress, so from 1973 to present. If we click on any of our public laws here, you'll see the legislative text itself, its co-sponsors, the committee in which it was referred to, the amendments that were made to the bill, and its summary. Notice, however, you don't have access to the substantive committee reports, your hearings, your committee prints, and your CRS reports. How do we access those materials? Well, we actually have to pay for them through a service called ProQuest. They may, however, be available on the committee's website, but ProQuest is very comprehensive. And so if we go to the Law Library's main page here, click on Legal Databases, and this is an alphabetized list. We scroll down to ProQuest Congressional. Notice I have three options here. I can do a basic search, an advanced search, where I can specify the fields that I would like to search within, and also the document types. So if I want to locate only CRS reports, I can select only CRS reports. If I only want to locate committee prints and publications, or House and Senate reports, I can select those. The real value here, however, is that you can search by number. And so I can search by the bill number if this is proposed legislation that has not yet been enacted. If it is legislation that has been enacted into law, I can search by its public law number. If I do not have the public law number, but I have its U.S. Statutes at Large citation, I can search by that citation. Remember, our public law number and our U.S. Statutes at Large citation, these are parallel citations. The content's going to be the same in either of those. I can also search by publication number here under bibliographic citations. And so if I want to locate a House report from, let's say, this legislative session, the first report that was created from this legislative session, I can click on search here. I can click on the PDF. And here's the actual report. If I wanted to share this link with a colleague, I can click on the permalink and then copy my link address. Few things about ProQuest that I should mention to you. You're unlikely to have access to this service in legal practice, and the reason why is because law firms have less interest in legal and legislative history compared with law schools, and it's an extremely expensive service. The law school spends, I think it's close to $120,000 a year for access to ProQuest. It's one of our most expensive databases. Um, However, while you're in law school and you're working on a seminar course or legal research projects, this is an invaluable source to locate federal legislative materials. It's rather exhaustive and comprehensive. If it doesn't exist on ProQuest, it's probably going to be very difficult to get, if you can get it at all.